Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Phoenix Councilman Jim Waring. Joining me on today's show is Phoenix City Manager Jeff Barton. Jeff, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Last time we spoke, you were budget director. A lot has changed since then. We've taken a little bit of hiatus on the show, and here we are. I don't even know what we're going to talk about because nothing has happened in the intervening couple of years. But one thing that did happen is you rose up to the ranks, starting, I believe, as an intern with the City of Phoenix. Is that correct?
Auditor.
Auditor, and you moved up, and now you're top dog, city manager. So congratulations on that appointment. I was proud to support it, and I think you've done a great job for the city in about 1 year, right?
Yes.
That you've been city manager.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. So you want to talk a little bit about what's going on, the differences between being the budget director and the assistant city manager, and now the person who's actually making the decisions?
You know, it's funny. When you sit next to the man that's making all the decisions, you look at the job and you think, okay, you know, maybe I can do that. But when you actually get into it, it's quite a bit more involved. I mean, the job never stops, and I think that's the piece that I think I'm struggling with the most. In fact, just trying to create that balance between my personal life and the job. My wife, even though she's a public servant herself and runs 18 county library branches, she doesn't understand that the City of Phoenix and what I'm responsible for is 24/7, 365. It just doesn't stop. I think that's the biggest challenge for me from a transitional standpoint. I think I had the benefit of, you know, being the budget director. The former city manager kind of used me semi as a quasi deputy city manager, so I got kind of involved in a little bit of everything. So I had, I think, a slightly easier transition than a lot of people did to the 12th floor. But being city manager, it's something I'm very proud of. You know, I was a little hesitant about taking the job, not just because it was a big job, but because, again, I was just worried about, you know, what it would take out of me and I have to sacrifice, you know, my family.
Well, I remember a little bit of hesitancy when we talked about this, but I was personally thrilled that you were willing to accept and do this community service, because it is a big job. I completely understand your comments about the budget. I served on the budget committee when I was in the state senate, and I always thought that was a huge advantage in terms of understanding the state agencies and really all that went on in terms of spending money, because that really is the public policy that directly matters and impacts citizens. We've had a pretty good run. We've had COVID since the last time we've done the show. We've had crazy economic challenges, stock market up and down. We want to talk a little bit about the city's finances. I know you know them inside and out, but now you're actually having to make the decisions, the big decisions, not just being directed that we need money for this or that. Maybe you can talk about those differences.
Sure. I think, you know, I'm very fortunate that I did occupy that position for a long time. And I think with your leadership and some of the direction of some of your counterparts on council, the last several years, we've actually taken, you know, financial resiliency to heart. And so we've done a lot of things that I think made us more resistant to the recessions. In the past, we would hit those hurdles and we'd go down really fast and really deep. I think over the last couple of years, we've diversified. We've also learned the importance of having healthy reserves. And you had a lot to do with that. You also had a lot to do with us, you know, honing in and fine-tuning our revenue projections. I think we're probably, and again, I say this with a little tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of pride and sincerity, we're probably the best at analyzing and forecasting budgetary resources than any other jurisdiction in the country. I mean, for the last couple of years, we've been within 1% or so. And that's a lot when you're talking about over $1 billion worth of general fund resources. But yes, a lot has happened. We had COVID. You know, when I first came downstairs to the deputy city manager position, I was leaving a budget director position, and we had a $56 million surplus. And 2 weeks later, that turned into a deficit. We are one of the only cities, I think, in the country of size and stature of ours that did not have to lay off employees, cut services, or cut compensation the last 2 years. And in fact, we've done just the opposite. We've added over 300 positions the last 2 years. We've restored employee compensation, and we've actually given employees raises for the first time in a really long time. So I'm very happy about where we are. We just started a new process to, you know, start a bond program. We haven't had one of those since 2006. And so I'm working on a strategic plan and a vision that we'll be bringing to you, the council, on December 13th, that will allow us to have 4 bond programs over the next 20 years, spaced 5 years apart, which is something that we should have been doing all along.
Well, and you talked about the future. Obviously, we've been the fastest growing city and the fastest growing county for quite some time. you have to plan for the future when that's your situation. I mean, the reverse would be negative if people are leaving, but when you're growing like we are, it's a positive, but it's not going to be a positive for very long if you don't take steps to make sure that the future is survivable, frankly. And so you talked a little bit about the revenue projections. I thought you undersold. You talked about the last couple of years. Really, it's been probably almost a decade now, because we had some that were badly off back in the early 2010s. And I can't emphasize enough, so for viewers who have never done it or dealing with a household budget, this is billions of dollars, and any kind of change is tens of millions of dollars. Anytime you're off, it's going to make a huge impact. And you guys have been spot on. I mean, there hasn't been any issue with that. I don't know for a fact that you're the best in the country, but that wouldn't surprise me at all, because you can only be so close. And you've been within, a few tens of millions of dollars on multi-billion dollars pretty much every year that I can recall. And that's amazing, but it really helps the policymakers know that we have confidence that money's going to be there, because as you suggest, during the economic recession that started in 2008, it was a disaster for the city. And services were cut, and things were done that nobody really wanted to do, but we really weren't prepared. Now, that was a pretty cataclysmic event. So I'm not saying that we could get through completely unscathed if that happened again, but we did have COVID. We didn't know what to expect. And as you suggest, we navigated that better than a lot of our peer cities did. We are the 5th biggest city in the country. So there aren't that many peers, but those that are really struggled. So I thank you for that, because that was a huge monumental task by your staff, and I think we navigated through it, in pretty good fashion.
I would agree.
You've had a couple other sort of major impacts on the city: new fire chief, new police chief. You want to talk a little bit about that, the gentleman that you picked, and how you came to those conclusions, the process that you used?
Well, it's never easy replacing, legacy employees like your fire chief and your police chief. And
both of whom had been with the city
for decades.
The police chief was gone, but came back, since the 80s, I think.
So in short order, I got appointed city manager in early October. February, our fire chief retires, and then, August, our police chief announces her retirement. So I had to replace both of those key and critical positions right out the gate. And for me, it was looking for someone, first and foremost, that would respect their troops and that would be there to support their troops. But at the same time, I wanted someone that was selfless and that didn't really see themselves as being this, this big behemoth on top of a throne. I wanted someone that was willing to work with the community, willing to work with their department for the best interest of our city and our employees. And I think in both cases, I found that, in Chief Duran, the fire chief, he's someone that I remember when I was a little baby MA2 in budget and research, working with his father, who was an assistant chief. So it was actually neat for me to be able to appoint someone like Chief Duran into that position, knowing the legacy that his family has had. And then as far as our police department, there's a lot going on right now. Again, you can't escape the news without seeing something. And I wanted to first and foremost find someone that I thought would restore kind of a sense of pride and dignity in our officers. And with a lot of investigations going on, internal and external investigations, I wanted someone that would ride above that and not be subject to any of that scrutiny. And so I made a decision that I was going to hire an interim chief until we navigated through all of those things. And I was able to interview several folks from across the country for that position. And I think the individual that I selected, Chief Sullivan, Mike Sullivan, he's got over 27 years of experience in major cities from Louisville to Baltimore. And when I sought him and when I decided to pick him, what resonated with me, everybody I interviewed cared deeply about the profession. But what resonated with me with him was he cared as much about reform as he did the need for supporting his troops. And he didn't see reform as being that, we have to turn the entire apple cart upside down. He saw that as an opportunity to train and diversify the police department and bring it into this new era of policing.
Well, and you said interim, but he is the chief now,
He is the chief now.
We're expecting maybe a year and a half of
Roughly.
interimship, if that's a word. But I will say he is eligible, though, after some discussion about that, I think he is eligible to apply for the permanent job. I thought that made sense, for my purposes. If he's doing a good job, why are we precluding him from potentially becoming the permanent chief? But I assume there will also be a nationwide search at the end of the rainbow. Is that a fair assessment?
And I think you hit that right on the head. I think when I first made that decision and that announcement, I did say definitively that this person that we selected as interim wouldn't be able to apply. And I think folks like yourself and a couple of others kind of said to me, hey, why would we discount someone if they're hitting a home run? Why would we pull them out of the game?
It could also limit who might apply.
It could.
Was my thinking
It
too.
could.
You're moving here, you're
Yeah.
uprooting your family.
Yeah, and so I think, at the end of this, Chief Sullivan will be able to apply just like everyone else. We'll do a nationwide search. That means folks that are internal to the department, external to the department, including the interim chief, will be able to apply and throw their name in. But yeah, you're probably right. We're probably 12 to 18 months away from starting that process. And it will take quite a while. I mean, you're hiring a major city police chief, the 5th largest city in the country. We're going to hire an entity, a headhunting firm to help us do that, an executive recruitment firm. So that's going to take some time.
Yeah. And speaking of police, people have probably heard watching this show anyway that we're short officers. Unfortunately, that's not the only area of the city where we're short of people. Since the virus, I think I'm fair in saying that, since about 2020, it's been a struggle for the city to hire, even though, we're a good employer. I think we pay fair wages, obviously have the medical and everything. But it's, streets department, I think last I checked, they have 700 spots and 190 vacancies. I mean, it's been tough going. Do we have any sense of why that is and what can be done about it?
Yeah, we've got about 2,700 vacancies across the city, to your point.
And that's out of about 14,000.
That's about 15,600. We got about
15,600.
15,600 FTEs across the city. I think, there are several reasons for that. One, I think the pandemic changed the way people work and the way they view work and the balance in their lives. The city, we were a little antiquated. COVID forced us to step into the new age with technology. We're able to do a lot more teleworking now. And, during the depths of COVID, we had a lot of our workforce that was eligible to work from home. They were working remotely. We slowly started to bring those folks back, and they're still able to telework to some extent. But I think that's partly having an issue. Some folks got used to really working from home, and they want to be able to continue that. All of our positions don't avail themselves to 100% telework, so I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is compensation. People want to be compensated differently. I'm an old timer. I'm a legacy employee now, 23 years in with the city. And we valued the pension. And a lot of folks, younger generation, they don't value the pension. And I know even speaking to my kids, I got 23 and 21-year-old, they're not thinking about working somewhere for 20 years. Right. They're not even thinking about sitting in a cube for 20 minutes, let alone working somewhere for 20 years. So I think we got to start appealing to differences, the things that people want that are different. I think we do pay a fair wage, but we're also going through a class and comp study right now, looking at all of our classifications. And I think, to be the fifth largest city in the country, we've got to pay to get the best. And I think you're going to see a significant, result in the class and comp study that we do that's going to suggest that we need to elevate some of our pay and compensation levels.
Well, just for viewers watching at home, we 5,000 miles of streets. We've got crews out cleaning them 4 times a year, picking the weeds and picking up the trash and so forth. People have noticed a drop in the cleanliness. Certainly I get those calls and we try to do what we can. But what people don't realize is we have more vacancies in that department than we have people doing the work. And to your point, there's really only so much you can do at a certain point. If people don't want to do that kind of work anymore, you can't telecommute doing that. And a lot of the city jobs, police, fire.
You got to be there.
The road crews, police and fire, I don't think they ever took a day off during the virus. I mean, there was a lot of road work done while frankly the streets were empty. And a lot of that was done in District 2. So, while obviously nobody wanted the virus, we did make use of that time and a lot of productive work got done. So there was really no time off. People might focus on the libraries and stuff that was closed, but to the extent it couldn't be closed and the work needed to be done, the city rolled right through it. I was proud of that. I thought those efforts were not only warranted, but necessary, and they were done, I thought, to the best of everybody's ability. But now, here we are, and we are struggling to hire, and that's frustrating. We boosted police pay, so they're the highest paid officers in the state. That's got its own different dynamic because it's a little bit different job, and I think some of the forces that might have been affecting our recruitments were a little different than maybe some of the other jobs. But if people are watching at home, send them to the city. And we are doing, like you said, the compensation study, which I think will probably inevitably lead to at least some pay bumps. But it has been a struggle, and it's something that's kind of flown below the radar. People hear about big businesses, but they don't hear as much about the government entities too are having the same issue.
Yeah, and I can tell you that, I've had this conversation with you off screen and with some of your counterparts. We've added 300 positions over the last 2 years, fiscal years, and a lot of those positions remain vacant.
Yeah.
So as we start building next year's budget, I've been very adamant in telling all of you that, from my perspective, we shouldn't talk about adding anything new because all we're doing is creating broken promises, because until we can get that compensation right, we're just going to be adding more vacancies. And so from my perspective, we've got to take care of what's most important to us. And right now that's our employees, because they're the ones that go out there, to your point, every day, and they're providing that service that our residents depend on. So I'd rather take this year, as we craft next year's budget, to really focus on compensating our employees adequately and getting that right before we try to endeavor on a new program or a new service.
And we have added some things. Some of these things I voted against, but you and I have had that discussion. I was really pleased to hear about your focus on sort of our core competencies, because I do think we got a little bit away from that. And you are absolutely right. If you tell people we're going to start doing this and then you don't do it, that's not acceptable either. Particularly if you kind of sensed maybe you weren't going to be able to do it anyway beforehand.
Don't even put yourself in that position.
But people do expect police, fire, clean parks, clean streets, obviously building the streets. So there are a lot of things we're doing where it's been a little bit of a struggle. I think we've managed to maintain, but it's been tough, and really that falls on your shoulders. I did want to talk a little bit, for folks who aren't familiar, kind of how our roles interact. I would say, from my perspective, I'm one of 9 members sort of a board of directors, and then you're our CEO, and we have a chief financial officer. But other than the chief judge, you're the one making the hires. You're the one hiring the 15,600 people, not us. And so the police chief and the fire chief, for example, are ultimately your call.
Yes.
You want to talk about that interaction, though? We have the city manager form of government, it's called, and it puts a lot of power in your hands. We make the policy, but then you have to implement it. And sometimes we probably vote for policies that you're like, I don't know how the heck I'm going to implement that. So I don't know if you have examples, or you just want to talk a little bit about those interactions.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the head. We're the 5th largest city in the country, the largest council manager form of government. A lot of other major cities have strong mayor form of government, where the mayor is the chief administrator. I think one of the benefits, the strongest benefit in my opinion, of having the council manager form of government is the consistency. So when you have a strong mayor form of government, you turn over the entire administration, department heads, everybody comes in new. So it's hard to have, a lot of built-in, sentiment and buy-in for programs and services that last a long time. So I think with the strong mayor, with the council manager form of government, we avoid a lot of that. But the relationship, you hit it right on the head. You guys are like the board of directors. You think about policies and practices that you want us to endeavor on, and I have to be the creative one to figure out how to put those in play, while at the same time navigating, state statutes and charter rules and regulations. So it's fun. It's like a puzzle. And then I use my department heads to help. Again, they're the ones out there directing staff on a daily basis. I'm not. So I do have a say in who I hire as far as the department heads. Then all the decisions that they make are delegated down to them. And we do have involvement with that, myself and my executive team on the 12th floor. But it's a very delicate balance. My job is not to be political. My job is to really administer the city and run the city.
Yeah. I mean, if we vote for something, whether I'm on the winning side or losing side, if it's 5-4,
we go.
You're implementing it, you go. I'm sure there are probably policies we ask for that maybe you don't personally agree with, but honestly, I can tell you in my interactions with you and your predecessors, generally that never comes across, which I do appreciate. You're just like, we're going to go do it, and that's important considering we own things like the airport and the water department. We really, people ask like, why do they do this at the airport? It's like, well, we're pretty loath, I think, and Jeff's probably pretty loath to tell the FAA or someone who actually runs an airport, how they're supposed to be landing the planes. You probably, as a citizen, don't want that either, to the extent you're riding on planes. Right. So, we try to make it, when people ask, like, you got all these rules in the city charter, like, what's it all mean? And if I had to sum up, I'd say, no disrespect to my former state, but we're trying not to be Chicago or Illinois. I mean, that's really the goal. Yeah. I think a lot of the folks who came here and set up Arizona and set up the city of Phoenix, I think had some experiences, and I think had that well in mind.
They put
you know,
safeguards in.
Yeah, and to try to avoid, hiring of friends and so forth. And, you don't like the councilman, so now your trash isn't going to get picked up. That's not the way it should be. I still think people have experiences from back east that they translate to here, and they assume it's going to be that way when they call our offices. And of course, that's not actually, in fact, the way it works. But I think our form of government really helps with that.
I think it does.
And some councils, the mayor is a separate entity, vetoing bills, if you will, and so forth. We don't have that either. The mayor is one of our voting bodies. So can you talk a little bit about your relationship with the council offices? Because we're all different. Yeah. We all have different needs. Right. It's a very diverse city.
It is.
It always has been, but I might say even more so now. Yeah. Things, we've talked about this at council meetings, that, police statistics or needs in Northeast Phoenix might not, correspond with what they need in Levine. Right. And so you have to piece all that together. Right. It's not totally unlike being governor, where you've got to keep South Phoenix happy and Flagstaff happy and Yuma happy. Right. Those aren't easy things to do. You want to talk about those challenges?
Yeah, I think part of that goes to just the relationship building, right? That everything comes down fundamentally to your relationship and your communication. And I think, it's imperative that we as a management staff routinely interact with the council, not just on the dais, but actually in the office, and have an understanding of what your constituents are asking for. You're right, every council district is different. Every interaction is different. For those of us that have been here a really long time, Councilman, there was a time when I first moved to Arizona and started working with the city, every council vote was a 9-0. If you got an 8-1, people were like ready to jump out the windows. And
I participated in changing that.
But they was like, what did we do wrong? But to that point, those 9-0 votes were just as dysfunctional as, a 6-3 or a 5-4 could be, because groupthink is not good. If everyone's thinking the same thing, that's not going to help change and accept the fact that we are all a very diverse group of people. So I think, you guys do a really great job actually meeting with and talking to your constituents to understand what's important to you. And so we develop various reports so that you guys can understand where we are in providing service to your geographical areas. And then we try to do a job to triage what those needs are. And so as we develop the budget, as we develop new processes and new policies, new programs, we try to make sure that we take all of those things into account. Now, are you going to make everyone happy? No. But I think, just like most things, the middle is where you want to be. And so that's where we try to be. Yeah.
Well, I try not to be the person, if I'm on the losing end, and I'm on a lot of losing ends. It does happen. I try to be understanding of your role. We've had some creative tension about that, particularly recently at some of the meetings. People, watching at home should understand, if the street department has a budget, if they can't, they don't have enough money to totally redo your street today, that's not necessarily on them, given the staffing shortages and the financial challenges and so forth. If you want to blame somebody, blame the elected officials, but it's not really fair to take it out, I would argue, on the staff. Same thing with policymakers. You're not always going to be on the winning end, and sometimes you got to accept that you got to move on. I do think the staff you put together, because when I got here, a lot of staffers have been here for a long time, vastly predated me. And now, you've been here 23 years, I've been here 11. So that's a little more balanced than 30 years versus one or something. Right. We always had Sal DeCiccio and Thelda Williams. Thelda was first elected in 1989, Sal in 1993. They were both gone for a while, but came back. We don't really have, once Sal is gone, that institutional memory, which I always found very helpful. We'd be talking about some policy, and how did that come to be? And Thelda would say, well, I remember that debate in 1992 we had. That was always very helpful to me. So this is a little bit of a new age. Forgive me for saying it. You're one of the old timers now.
I am.
But we're talking about since 2000, which when you say that out loud doesn't sound as long ago as 1989. So, do you feel like we've lost some of that institutional knowledge? I mean, I know some of those folks are still around and still can be called on, but it is a much different city than the one that I found when I first got elected.
No, I do. I feel that there are certain positions in the organization that we've lost a lot of that institutional knowledge. And then I think during the recession, we also gutted the organization of certain levels of positions. So we also lost progression, the career growth of people. So there used to be a systemic process that you would go through to become a deputy or whatever. And a lot of those middle positions were eliminated during the depths of the recession. But I do think that, not all when employees leave and you lose some of that depth of knowledge, that's not all bad, because sometimes you have to forget the past to move forward. And I think we're at a place now where this city is not the same as it was. I mean, when I first moved here, I used to laugh. Like, it was a downtown, but it wasn't really a downtown. Right. You know, the city it was the 6th largest city at the time, but we functioned like Mayberry. And I think, you know, now we've evolved. Our politics have evolved. You know, you got social media. Everything is instantaneous. So people have different expectations. But I do think with the loss of some of that institutional knowledge, it's a good thing, because it does force us to recreate and break the things that are broken. You know, I'm a process person. I'm an auditor, a budget person, so I think more in terms of process. And so I think it gives us the opportunity to break down our processes and look for opportunities to streamline things.
Well, I always appreciate your deputies. You know, they're usually willing to work with you, like, we can't do it exactly this way, Councilman, but you know what? We might be able to achieve the same result in maybe even a more timely fashion. I mean, that's been a good thing. Yeah. I sort of laughed. I moved here in 1991 from Illinois, not from Chicago, but certainly that was nearby. Yeah. That was my sort of conception of a big city. Hadn't been to New York yet at that point in my life. And I remember driving in and going, this is the 6th biggest city. It just, you know, it didn't have the skyscrapers like other cities. It wasn't as clearly big and dense as Los Angeles. It was a different thing. And I know what you do, and I sort of loved that about it. It had that hometown feel. But sadly, for some of us, it seems like it kind of outgrew that. And it took a different way of thinking. Yeah. And, you know, the airport grew. It became one of the busiest. You know, it had so many water, you know, we're so spread out. We had so many water pipes to fix and so forth. I mean, it's a big production. It is. I mean, our overall budget, if you include the airport and the water department and everything, is
$6 billion.
I mean, that's the stuff we're voting on. I tell people that, and they're always kind of shocked. But, you know, we're 500-something square miles. We have 740 miles of streets just in District 2. Yeah. You know, when people are like, why don't you time out the lights at the intersection? Yeah. And we are working on that, but I think it was 1,100 signalized intersections. Each one of those maybe $1 million a pop. So, you know, that's a heavy lift. Not going to do that in a day. And then one of the things I like about these jobs, just as an aside, when I did talk to the streets department about that, they were like, just remember, you got lights that were put in 1985 and lights that were put in last year. So how good would your rotary phone from 1985 talk to your iPhone in 20? You don't think about things like that. And again, all these things fall in your purview. You know?
It is a big production. I mean, to your point, I mean, with a $6 billion all-in budget, you know, that's everything from the enterprise funds to the general fund, the pay-as-you-go capital, everything, right? You know, that's just shy of a Fortune 500 company, which is about a 6.4. I think the smallest Fortune 500 company is $6.4 billion. Yeah.
So it's just something that not making any excuses. There are always going to be things that, you know, don't get done immediately, but all the transactions, I just think of all the banking the city has to do, all the credit card numbers, and we've been very fortunate.
We have
you
to
know,
knock on
other
wood.
cities have not been as fortunate. Atlanta had big incidences. Some small towns have had big incidences where millions were lost. I think so far we've been able to navigate some really crazy circumstances in the last 15 years pretty adeptly. And we've got more challenges to come. I would say police staffing is foremost among them. We have water issues. We have many issues, but I am confident under your leadership that we'll move forward. So far, so good. 1 year in, fingers crossed for the next few. But I do think things are in good hands, and I wanted you to come on the show so we could sort of illustrate that to viewers and see what you had to say. So Jeff, I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for your time. It's very valuable, and we wish you all the best in your position.
Thank you. And again, I appreciate the vote of confidence in me and my staff. And again, I said when I first took the office that we would make the city run like it's never run before. And I firmly believe that. And I believe that our employees are also committed to that same thing.
Yeah. Well, I always appreciate their enthusiasm. And if anything falls through the cracks, either blame the electeds or understand that it's not for a lack of effort. So thank you, Jeff. I appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website, Phoenix.gov/District 2. We look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.